Good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Something to chew on this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha, Parshas Emor, contains the episode of the Megadef, or the Makalel, the person who blasphemed using the name of Hashem in order to utter a curse from his mouth, does so publicly, and is put to death. This is one of the greatest possible infractions in all of Judaism, in all of Halacha, in all of Torah and Mitzvos, is the notion of taking that which is supposed to remain so kadosh, so separate, so set aside, and then to use it, meaning the name of Hashem, not only for personal use, but in a manner that just completely undermines the proper honor and the proper respect that ought to be given HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his name. Very, very interesting halacha that pertains specifically to this avera. Before this person is put to death, when the actual verdict comes out and it's determined that indeed he was culpable for this capital offense, the Eidim, the witnesses who testify against him, as well as all of the judges, all need to perform smicha on his head. They all place their hands upon his head, and they all rest upon his head, and they are somech. They shift their weight upon him. The Rambam, quoting or speaking of this halacha in Hilchas Avodas Kochavim, say that when they do so, that they all are somchem es yedehem echad echad. Each one at a time, places their hands upon his head. Arosh Megadef, upon the head of the blasphemer. Va'omer lo, and they say to him as follows: Damcha b'roshcha, that your blood is upon your own head. Sha'ata garamtalach, you're the one who caused this to befall you. This is your responsibility. You need to take responsibility. Effectively, what we're doing is we are taking our weight and we are shifting. We're shifting the blame. We're shifting the weight. We're shifting the onus and the responsibility of what took place to the person who actually committed the offense. And yet, on the other hand, what this becomes reminiscent of, obviously, is a karban. What happens when we bring a karban is that there is also a process of smicha. The owner of the karban has to shift his weight upon the animal, saying that you are going to be put to death as opposed to me. I was the one who committed the sin, and yet I'm transferring that weight. I'm transferring the brunt, the impact of that sin to the animal. And the animal, this is one of the great, by the great graces of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have the ability and the opportunity to place the karban on the mizbeach rather than placing ourselves on the mizbeach. What's fascinating about smicha, about this idea of resting or leaning, shifting our weight from the animal, or in this case, to the actual perpetrator of this crime, is that on the one hand, yes, the Rambam notes that what we're really saying is that we're transferring the weight or the responsibility. On the other hand, it is so reminiscent of what happens when there is a process by which we recognize our own guilt, and yet saying that nevertheless, you're going to take the fall. I believe that both are simultaneously true, and we need to be aware of both. On the one hand, what happens when we see public crime? What happens when we see somebody violate some sort of measure, some sort of halacha, policy, mitzvah, what have you? When somebody commits an avera, on the one hand, it must be so clear, and this is really the message that we need to take ourselves, that we're at fault, and that we bear the responsibility of that violation, of that avera. I can't point to my surroundings. I can't point to the environment. I can't say, well, listen, maybe if the community had been a little bit better, maybe if the people around me, if my friends, if my family, my upbringing was a little better, if I had had a greater pedigree, then maybe I wouldn't have committed this sin. Maybe, but nevertheless, the reality of bechira chavshis, the reality of free will, is that we, each of us, is responsible for our own deeds and our own misdeeds, our own actions and our own inactions, our own steps and our own missteps. We need to accept that responsibility and recognize that ultimately, damcha b'roshcha, as the Rambam writes, that the blood is upon our own heads, and we need to accept full responsibility for whatever it is that we might violate as human beings, on the one hand. On the other hand, there's also the reality that when we act as part of a community, we need to be conscious of the fact that we do help to shape reality. We do help to build an atmosphere and an environment around people that will either facilitate or impede growth, that will either facilitate shmiras hamitzvos or will impede shmiras hamitzvos. Am I part of a culture? Am I helping pour my energy and my ability into the creation of a culture that's going to allow people to really thrive in keeping halacha and performing the mitzvos? Or am I throwing up a stumbling block right in their path? That's something that we all need to be conscious of. And perhaps, as much as we are saying this really is your responsibility, megadef, you blasphemer, the reality is that the process of smicha helps and allows for a little bit of introspection, a little bit of self-reflection. Who are we as a community? On some level, we do need to take some measure of responsibility. Not that we are all guilty, and not that everybody here in this situation, this crime, that everybody is put to death, chas v'shalom. But the process by which we analyze, have we in some measure contributed to this? If we were a little bit more makpid on kvod shamayim, would this person have blasphemed? If we made it absolutely taboo for anybody to utter the name of Hashem, if we made it absolutely anathema in our society to mistreat or to step upon the kvod shamayim in a manner that halacha demands, in a manner that's appropriate, would this reality ever have actually come to pass? It's something that we all need to reflect upon when we consider our roles both as private individuals. When I do sin, when I do misstep, it's my responsibility. I need to reflect on how I can personally become better without pointing fingers and without saying that it's the community and it's the government and it's this culture and it's the place where I live. I need to assume responsibility, and yet on the other hand, I also need to assume responsibility as part of that culture, as part of that society, as part of that community. Am I doing the sorts of things that will help to enable Shmiras HaMitzvos, will enable Kvod Shamayim, will enable people to thrive in an atmosphere that is set forth and that's built with a proper framework to allow for mitzvah observance, to allow for thriving in the halachic realm and in the communal realm, to allow people to do the right thing, or somehow or another am I helping to serve to impede that? A lot of self-reflection that is important both when we sin as well as when we see the sins of others. Can we and should we perhaps be doing just a little bit more? Wishing everybody a very good Shabbos.